The security cameras at Southeast Atlanta Medical Center captured everything that happened at 7:23 a.m. on March 15, 2022. A young black woman in scrubs walked through the main entrance, her pregnant belly visible beneath her medical uniform. She moved with the confident familiarity of someone who belonged there, badge clipped to her pocket, coffee in one hand, purse slung over her shoulder. Special Agents Marcus Chen and Diana Rodriguez from Immigration and Customs Enforcement had been conducting what they called a targeted sweep of medical facilities across Atlanta for the past week. They claimed they were looking for undocumented workers who might be using false identities to gain employment in sensitive healthcare positions. In reality, they had been operating without proper oversight, making assumptions based on appearance rather than evidence. Something about this woman triggered their attention immediately. Her skin color, her pregnancy, something indefinable that made them suspicious. What these federal agents didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their entire careers. One decision that would cost them their badges, trigger a federal civil rights investigation, result in an $18.5 million settlement, and expose a systematic pattern of racial profiling that had been ignored for years. The cameras were recording everything. Hospital staff were beginning to gather and watch. Phones were about to come out. And these agents were about to discover that the woman they were targeting wasn't just an American citizen, she was a decorated military veteran, a licensed medical professional with federal security clearances, and someone who knew exactly what her constitutional rights were and wasn't afraid to assert them. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your state in the comments below, and if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Keisha Washington had been a registered nurse for 6 years at Southeast Atlanta Medical Center. Before that, she spent 4 years in the United States Army as a combat medic, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan and earning 3 commendations, including a Bronze Star Medal for her heroic actions during a Taliban attack on her forward operating base. She had seen combat, saved lives under enemy fire, and treated wounded soldiers in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. During her second tour, she single-handedly stabilized and evacuated 4 critically wounded soldiers when their convoy was hit by an improvised explosive device. She knew how to handle pressure and stay calm when everything around her was chaos. She definitely knew what it meant to serve her country with honor. After completing her military service with an honorable discharge, Keisha used her GI Bill benefits to complete her nursing degree at Emory University, graduating summa cum laude with a 3.9 GPA. She had offers from multiple hospitals, but chose Southeast Atlanta Medical Center because of their trauma program and their commitment to serving underserved communities. Her colleagues respected her clinical judgment. Her patients trusted her bedside manner. Her supervisors had promoted her twice in 5 years because of her exceptional clinical skills, her unshakable professionalism during medical emergencies, and her natural leadership abilities with newer nurses. Keisha was also 29 weeks pregnant with her first child, a son she and her husband had already named Marcus after her grandfather who had served in World War II. Her husband, James, was also a military veteran who now worked as a firefighter with the Atlanta Fire Department. They had been trying to have children for 3 years and were overjoyed when they finally conceived. She was the kind of person who helped elderly patients call their families when they were scared, who stayed late to comfort children in the emergency room who had been brought in without parents, and who never lost her temper even during the most stressful shifts when the trauma bay was overflowing and emotions were running high. That Tuesday morning, Keisha was arriving for her regular 8 a.m. shift in the emergency department. She had been dealing with some morning sickness earlier in her pregnancy, but was feeling better now in her 3rd trimester. She wanted to get to work a few minutes early to review the night shift reports and prepare for what was expected to be a busy day. She carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of military training and medical experience. Nothing about her suggested she was anything other than exactly what she appeared to be: a pregnant nurse arriving for another day of saving lives. She had no idea that 2 ICE agents had been watching the hospital for 3 days, conducting what they called surveillance, or that her appearance had somehow marked her as a target in their minds. Agent Chen approached Keisha near the main reception desk, his hand already resting near his weapon in a gesture designed to intimidate. He was a 12-year veteran of immigration enforcement who had developed what his colleagues privately called an aggressive style of questioning. He didn't introduce himself properly or explain why he was approaching her. Instead, he immediately demanded to see her identification, speaking in a tone that suggested he had already decided she was guilty of something. His body language was confrontational from the very first moment. Feet planted wide, shoulders squared, jaw tight with barely controlled hostility. Keisha stopped walking, confused but maintaining her composure. When she asked if there was a problem, Chen didn't really answer. Instead, he asked what she was doing at the hospital, as if her presence itself was suspicious. She explained calmly that she worked there and was arriving for her shift, pointing to her hospital badge and medical scrubs as obvious evidence. He asked to see her work badge, which she showed him, holding it up clearly so he could read her name and department. Chen barely glanced at the identification card before demanding something else entirely. He wanted to see a passport or green card instead, documents that would prove she had the legal right to be in the United States. The question hit Keisha like a physical blow. It told her everything she needed to know about why she had been singled out. This wasn't about her work badge or her presence at the hospital. This wasn't about any legitimate security concern. This was about the color of her skin and the assumptions these agents had made about who belonged in America based on appearance alone. Around them, hospital staff began to notice the confrontation. The morning shift change meant that nurses, doctors, and support staff were moving through the main entrance, and several stopped to watch what was clearly becoming a tense situation. A security guard named William Torres, who had worked at the hospital for 8 years and knew Keisha well, approached and asked if everything was all right. Chen immediately flashed his ICE badge and told Torres to step back, claiming this was federal business that didn't concern hospital security. Torres retreated but remained close enough to watch what was happening, already reaching for his radio to contact his supervisor about the unusual situation developing in the main lobby. Agent Rodriguez joined her partner, positioning herself slightly behind and to the side of Keisha in a formation designed to block any easy exit. The two agents had clearly used these intimidation tactics many times before, moving with the practiced coordination of partners who had conducted numerous arrests together. Rodriguez was newer to immigration enforcement, having transferred from Border Patrol only 2 years earlier, but she had already adopted Chen's aggressive approach to questioning. Keisha remained calm and explained that she was an American citizen born in Atlanta who could prove her citizenship if needed, though she questioned why federal immigration agents were targeting her in the first place. She spoke in the measured, professional tone that her military training had taught her to use in high-stress situations, but inside she was already calculating her options and preparing for what might come next. Chen's response revealed the full depth of his racial bias. He told her that they had received reports of undocumented workers at the hospital using false identities to gain employment. When Keisha asked what specific reports involved her personally, he became evasive, refusing to provide details. When she asked who had reported her specifically, he accused her of asking too many questions and told her that her attitude was making him suspicious. The truth was becoming clear to everyone watching. There had been no reports about Keisha specifically. These agents had targeted her based on appearance alone, making assumptions about her immigration status because of her race, her pregnancy, and their own prejudices. Dr. Patricia Williams, a nurse supervisor who had worked with Keisha for 4 years and respected her enormously, approached the group. She immediately identified herself as Keisha's supervisor and confirmed that she was indeed an employee in good standing who was scheduled to work that morning. Dr. Williams offered to call hospital administration immediately to verify Keisha's employment status, citizenship, and background check results. Chen refused the offer curtly and told the supervisor to leave the area immediately, claiming that civilian interference with a federal investigation was itself a criminal offense. Keisha made a reasonable request that any citizen had the right to make. She asked to speak with the agent's supervisor. She requested their badge numbers and asked them to explain the legal authority for their questioning. These were textbook constitutional protections that every law enforcement officer should respect and facilitate. Chen's reaction was telling and completely unprofessional. Instead of providing the requested information, he became defensive and hostile. He told Keisha that she was being uncooperative and that her knowledge of legal procedures was making him more suspicious, not less. This was a clear violation of federal procedure and constitutional law. Citizens have an absolute right to ask questions of law enforcement officers, and exercising constitutional rights cannot be used as evidence of guilt or grounds for escalating an encounter. Chen announced that they needed to search Keisha's belongings to look for false identification documents, claiming this was standard procedure for suspected immigration violations. Keisha calmly but firmly informed him that she did not consent to any search of her person or property, clearly stating her Fourth Amendment rights. She explained that without a warrant or probable cause, such a search would be illegal under federal law. Her military background had included training on constitutional rights, and her nursing education had covered patient privacy rights, so she understood legal protections better than most civilians. When Chen ignored her refusal and attempted to grab her purse, Keisha held onto it firmly, not aggressively, but clearly asserting her constitutional rights. She didn't pull away violently or make any threatening movements, but she maintained control of her personal property while continuing to state that she did not consent to any search. This reasonable assertion of constitutional rights gave Chen the excuse he was looking for to escalate the situation dramatically and dangerously. He announced loudly that Keisha was interfering with a federal investigation and obstructing immigration enforcement. He called for backup on his radio and told Rodriguez to prepare restraints for arrest. The situation had gone from questioning to attempted arrest in a matter of seconds, transforming what should have been a simple verification process into a federal incident. Hospital staff watched in shock and horror as two federal agents prepared to handcuff a pregnant employee for the apparent crime of coming to work and exercising her constitutional rights. Type "wrong" in the comments if you think these agents should have verified her citizenship before escalating to arrest. Rodriguez began expressing serious doubts about their approach, quietly suggesting to Chen that they should contact their supervisor before proceeding with any arrest. She pointed out that they had no concrete evidence of immigration violations and that hospital staff were vouching for Keisha's employment status, citizenship, and character. Rodriguez was concerned that they were moving too fast without proper verification, but Chen dismissed her concerns aggressively and told her they needed to trust their training and instincts rather than being manipulated by what he called sob stories and excuses. Dr. Maria Santos, the emergency department director and a 15-year veteran of emergency medicine, arrived at the scene after being contacted by security. She immediately identified herself to the agents by name and title, demanding an explanation for their presence in her hospital. She confirmed that Keisha was not only a valued employee but one of their most skilled and dedicated nurses who had been working at the hospital for years without any disciplinary actions or concerns. Dr. Santos offered to provide employment records, background check results, and character references immediately. Chen told Dr. Santos that they were conducting immigration enforcement operations and that her hospital was harboring illegal workers who were using false identities to gain employment in sensitive healthcare positions. Dr. Santos was stunned by the accusation and demanded to see their warrant or court order authorizing a search of hospital premises and questioning of hospital employees. When the agents admitted they had no such authorization, Dr. Santos informed them that their presence was unauthorized and potentially illegal. More staff gathered to witness the confrontation, including several nurses who had served in the military themselves and were particularly outraged to see a pregnant veteran being treated like a dangerous criminal. Maria Rodriguez, a charge nurse who had served 2 tours in Iraq, began recording everything on her phone while providing a steady commentary about what she was witnessing. Her video would later become crucial evidence in the federal prosecution. Despite mounting evidence that they had made a catastrophic mistake, Chen made the decision to arrest Keisha anyway. He announced that she was being detained on suspicion of immigration violations and interference with a federal investigation, charges that had no legal foundation based on the evidence they had gathered. Rodriguez physically placed handcuffs on a 7 months pregnant woman, forcing her hands behind her back in a way that strained her shoulders and put dangerous pressure on her abdomen and the baby she was carrying. Keisha asked repeatedly for medical attention, explaining that the restraints were causing her physical discomfort and potentially endangering her unborn child. She described experiencing sharp pains in her abdomen and difficulty breathing due to the position of her arms and the stress of the situation. The agents ignored these requests completely, showing callous disregard for both mother and baby that would later become a major element in both criminal and civil proceedings. Dr. Santos intervened immediately, demanding that the agents allow her to examine Keisha for pregnancy-related complications. As a medical professional with legal obligations to ensure patient safety, she had both the authority and responsibility to provide emergency care to anyone experiencing medical distress on hospital property. Chen refused to allow any medical examination and threatened to arrest Dr. Santos as well for interfering with federal law enforcement, a threat that had absolutely no legal basis and demonstrated his complete ignorance of both medical ethics and federal law. The handcuffs were applied too tightly, cutting off circulation to Keisha's hands and causing numbness and tingling that could indicate nerve damage. She informed the agents of this medical problem and requested that the restraints be loosened for safety reasons, explaining that pregnant women are at higher risk for circulation problems and nerve damage. Rodriguez acknowledged the complaint but made no effort to address it, claiming that the handcuffs were applied according to federal standards and couldn't be adjusted. Hospital security had immediately contacted the Atlanta Police Department to report a disturbance involving federal agents and a hospital employee. Local officers arrived within minutes and were shocked to find ICE agents arresting a pregnant hospital employee without any apparent justification or proper documentation. The responding officers, Sergeants Williams and Chen, no relation to the ICE agent, requested an explanation for the arrest and were told a story that contradicted everything they could observe with their own eyes. Chen made his worst decision yet. He decided to transport Keisha to ICE detention for processing, despite having no legal authority to detain an American citizen. He radioed ICE dispatch with a false report, claiming they had arrested an undocumented individual who had provided fraudulent employment documents and resisted arrest. Anyone listening to the radio traffic could hear that this was a complete fabrication. The Atlanta police officers on scene were becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Sergeant Williams approached Chen directly and asked whether they had verified Keisha's citizenship status before making the arrest. Chen brushed off the question, insisting that they would sort out her status at the detention center. This answer horrified the local officers. Dr. Santos made a formal medical recommendation that Keisha should not be transported in restraints due to her advanced pregnancy and stress-related complications she was experiencing. Chen rejected the medical recommendation and accused Dr. Santos of trying to obstruct federal law enforcement. Do you think these agents realized they had made a mistake? Let me know in the comments. The situation reached its breaking point when Keisha requested immediate medical attention due to contractions she was experiencing. The stress of the arrest and physical restraints had triggered potential pregnancy complications. Dr. Santos insisted on immediate medical intervention, explaining that both mother and baby could be in danger. Rodriguez finally broke ranks with her partner. She approached Sergeant Williams and quietly asked whether they should contact ICE supervision for guidance. Williams recommended that they immediately verify Keisha's citizenship status before proceeding with any transport. Chen overheard this conversation and angrily rejected any delay. He ordered Rodriguez to prepare Keisha for transport immediately, regardless of her medical condition. The moment that changed everything came when Dr. Santos contacted the hospital's federal liaison office. Within minutes, the federal liaison confirmed what everyone at the hospital already knew. Keisha Washington was not only an American citizen, but also a federally employed contractor who provided nursing services for veteran patients through a Department of Veterans Affairs partnership program. Chen had detained a pregnant American citizen who was also a federal employee, a military veteran, and someone whose personnel file contained extensive background checks and security clearances. The color drained from Rodriguez's face as the magnitude of their error became clear. Instead of immediately apologizing and releasing Keisha, Chen questioned the validity of the information and suggested that the documents might be fraudulent. Dr. Santos contacted the VA directly, providing Keisha's federal ID number. Within moments, VA officials confirmed her employment status, veteran benefits, security clearance level, and spotless background check results. Hospital administrators contacted their congressional liaison, who immediately reached out to Representative John Lewis's office. Lewis's staff contacted ICE headquarters within 30 minutes, demanding an immediate explanation for the detention of a pregnant veteran and federal employee. Field Supervisor Janet Morrison arrived at the hospital within 45 minutes and immediately assessed the situation. She understood that her agents had created a federal incident of massive proportions. Morrison ordered Keisha's immediate release and began damage control proceedings. Chen argued with his supervisor, insisting that Keisha's behavior had been suspicious and that they had followed proper procedure. Every word out of his mouth just dug the hole deeper. The handcuffs were removed from Keisha's wrists after she had been restrained for over an hour. Medical staff immediately examined her and documented the physical marks left by the restraints and elevated blood pressure. The videos hit social media within hours of the incident. Hospital staff posted footage with detailed explanations of what they had witnessed. 2 ICE agents arresting a pregnant black nurse based on nothing more than racial assumptions and prejudicial profiling. The hashtag #PregnantNurse. Arrested began trending nationally within 6 hours, joined by Napaksh IC accountability and veteran rights. By midnight, the footage had accumulated hundreds of thousands of views across multiple platforms, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. The hospital workers who had recorded the incident provided detailed commentary explaining Keisha's background, her military service, her federal employment status, and the complete lack of justification for her arrest. Their first-hand accounts made the story even more compelling and outrageous. By the next morning, the videos had garnered millions of views and were picked up by every major news outlet in the country. CNN led with the story during their morning broadcast. MSNBC dedicated an entire segment to the incident. Fox News covered it extensively. The story had everything that made for compelling and horrifying news coverage. Federal agents acting beyond their authority, obvious racial profiling, a pregnant woman in medical distress, a military veteran, and crystal-clear video evidence of civil rights violations captured from multiple angles. Type "justice" in the comments if you think these agents got exactly what they deserved. Chen's employment history came out immediately after the story broke, and it painted a disturbing picture of systematic misconduct. Investigative journalists discovered that he had been the subject of 7 previous formal complaints for excessive force and racial profiling during his 5 years with ICE. 4 of those complaints specifically involved the illegal detention of American citizens who were later released without any charges being filed. In one particularly egregious case from 2019, Chen had detained a Puerto Rican family at a shopping mall for over 3 hours, refusing to accept their U.S. birth certificates as proof of citizenship and claiming they looked suspicious. Rodriguez's personnel file revealed 3 previous complaints, all involving inappropriate targeting of Latino hospital workers, construction workers, and service employees. Both agents had been flagged by their supervisors multiple times for what internal memos described as aggressive enforcement tactics and pattern recognition issues. They had been mandated to attend additional cultural sensitivity training sessions, but neither had faced any real disciplinary action that would have changed their behavior or limited their authority to conduct immigration enforcement operations. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General opened an immediate and comprehensive investigation into both agents and the Atlanta field office that had allowed their documented pattern of misconduct to continue unchecked for years. The investigation would eventually reveal that supervisors had received multiple complaints about both agents, but had consistently failed to take meaningful disciplinary action, instead relying on additional training and verbal counseling that had proven completely ineffective. More victims began coming forward once the news story broke and spread across social media platforms. Over the next week, 14 additional people contacted civil rights attorneys claiming they had been illegally detained, harassed, or mistreated by Chen and Rodriguez during the past 3 years. These victims included a Puerto Rican teacher who was handcuffed at an elementary school in front of her students, a Mexican-American construction worker who was arrested at a job site despite showing his valid U.S. passport, 3 other hospital workers who had been questioned about their immigration status while trying to perform their medical duties, and multiple service workers who had been detained at restaurants and retail establishments. The pattern was undeniable and systematic. These agents had been conducting illegal sweeps based entirely on racial profiling, targeting anyone who appeared to be Hispanic or Latino regardless of their actual citizenship status, employment authorization, or legal right to be in the United States. They had been operating essentially as a rogue unit within ICE, conducting enforcement operations without proper oversight or legal justification. ICE headquarters placed both agents on administrative leave within 24 hours of the story breaking, but this action was widely seen as damage control rather than genuine accountability. The agency released a carefully worded statement saying they were deeply concerned by the allegations and were conducting a thorough investigation, but they stopped short of admitting wrongdoing or apologizing to Keisha and the other victims. The statement satisfied absolutely no one. Civil rights organizations immediately demanded criminal prosecutions and congressional hearings. Members of Congress from both parties called for investigations into ICE's enforcement practices and oversight procedures. The American Nurses Association issued a strongly worded statement condemning the treatment of healthcare workers by federal agents and demanding immediate policy changes to protect medical personnel. The American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars both issued statements expressing outrage that a decorated military veteran had been treated like a criminal while trying to serve her community as a healthcare worker. The The Department of Veterans Affairs announced they were conducting an urgent review of all interactions between ICE and veteran employees to ensure that no other veterans had been illegally targeted based on racial profiling or immigration enforcement overreach. This comprehensive review would eventually identify 12 other concerning cases of questionable ICE enforcement involving veterans, including several cases where veterans' military identification and service records had been ignored or dismissed by immigration agents. 6 weeks after the incident, federal prosecutors filed comprehensive criminal charges against both ICE agents. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, Ryan Buchanan, announced a prosecution that would send an unmistakable message about civil rights violations by federal agents. The charges were serious and carried substantial prison time. Chen faced 5 federal charges including deprivation of civil rights under color of law, false imprisonment of a federal employee, filing false federal reports to federal investigators, endangering the welfare of a pregnant woman, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Rodriguez faced 3 charges including deprivation of civil rights under color of law, assault on a federal employee, and filing false reports to federal supervisors. The conspiracy charge against Chen was particularly significant because it elevated his potential sentence and indicated that prosecutors believed this was part of a coordinated pattern of illegal behavior. The agent's defense attorneys, paid for by their federal employee union, attempted multiple strategies to argue that they had been following standard ICE training and established procedures for immigration enforcement operations. This argument collapsed immediately when federal prosecutors produced official ICE training materials that explicitly prohibited racial profiling and required positive verification of citizenship status before any arrest or detention could take place. The training materials were unambiguous. Agents cannot target individuals based on appearance alone and must have specific, articulable evidence of immigration violations. Chen's lead attorney tried to claim that Keisha's behavior during the encounter had been inherently suspicious and that any reasonable federal agent would have acted similarly given the circumstances they observed. Federal prosecutors systematically destroyed this argument by playing hospital security footage that showed Keisha calmly walking to work exactly like every other hospital employee, greeting colleagues normally, and displaying absolutely no behavior that could reasonably be considered suspicious, threatening, or indicative of immigration violations. If you've made it this far, you're part of the solution. Subscribe and share this story so others can learn from it. The trial took place 18 months after the original incident, and the federal courthouse in Atlanta was packed every single day with supporters, including many of Keisha's colleagues from the hospital, fellow veterans from her military service, civil rights advocates, and legal observers who understood the broader implications of the case for immigration enforcement and constitutional protection. The evidence against both agents was overwhelming and came from multiple independent sources. Federal prosecutors presented security footage from 7 different hospital cameras that captured the entire incident from multiple angles. Body camera footage from Atlanta police officers who had responded to the disturbance. Cell phone videos from multiple witnesses, including hospital staff and visitors. Detailed medical records documenting Keisha's pregnancy complications and the physical effects of her wrongful detention. Expert testimony from former ICE officials about proper enforcement procedures and constitutional requirements, testimony from constitutional law professors about 4th and 14th Amendment protections, and devastating testimony from 12 other victims who described remarkably similar encounters with these same 2 agents over a 3-year period. Keisha herself testified for 2 full days, providing calm, detailed, and devastating accounts of every aspect of her arrest and detention. Her testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated her complete cooperation throughout the encounter and highlighted the agent's escalating aggression, despite her compliance with every reasonable request. She described the physical pain of being handcuffed while pregnant, the fear she felt not just for her own safety, but for the safety of her unborn child, and the profound humiliation of being treated like a dangerous criminal in front of colleagues and patients who knew her character and distinguished service record. Hospital staff provided extensive testimony about the medical dangers posed by handcuffing and restraining a pregnant woman, particularly one who was already experiencing stress-induced complications. Dr. Santos provided detailed expert medical testimony explaining how the agent's refusal to allow immediate medical care could have resulted in miscarriage, premature labor, or serious harm to both mother and baby. The most damaging testimony came from current and former ICE supervisors and training instructors who explained in excruciating detail how Chen and Rodriguez had violated virtually every protocol and procedure for immigration enforcement. Former ICE Director John Torres testified that the agents had no legal authority to conduct unsupervised sweeps at hospitals, no legitimate basis for targeting Keisha specifically based on her appearance, and no justification for ignoring her constitutional rights to due process and medical care during detention. Expert witnesses also testified about the documented psychological and physical impact of racial profiling, particularly on pregnant women and military veterans. Dr. Beverly Tatum, a leading researcher on racial bias, explained how the trauma of discriminatory treatment can have lasting effects on both victims and their families, while Dr. James Wright, a specialist in pregnancy-related medical complications, described the specific dangers that stress and physical restraint pose to pregnant women in their third trimester. The jury, composed of 8 women and 4 men from diverse racial and professional backgrounds, deliberated for less than 6 hours across 2 days. The brevity of their deliberation reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the clarity of the constitutional violations that had occurred, guilty on all counts for both agents. Chen showed no visible emotion as the verdict was read, but Rodriguez broke down crying as she realized her career and future had been destroyed. Chen received 3 years and 4 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release, $15,000 in fines, and permanent prohibition from any law enforcement employment. Rodriguez received 1 year and 8 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release, $8,000 in fines, and permanent prohibition from law enforcement employment. The civil lawsuit against ICE and the Department of Homeland Security settled for $18.5 million. The settlement included $15.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages to Keisha, $2.7 million for medical monitoring and counseling services, comprehensive reforms to ICE training and oversight procedures, and independent monitoring of ICE workplace enforcement for 5 years. Chen and Rodriguez were fired from ICE within 48 hours of their convictions. Their federal law enforcement careers were over permanently, with no possibility of employment by any law enforcement agency in the United States. Chen was 34 years old and had spent his entire adult life in federal service. Rodriguez, a single mother of 2, lost her family's health insurance and federal pension benefits along with her job. These weren't things Keisha had wished for, but they were the natural result of choices the agents had made. The incident triggered sweeping reforms throughout ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. New mandatory training on racial profiling and constitutional rights for all enforcement agents was implemented. Revised protocols requiring supervisor approval for any workplace enforcement operations were established. Independent civilian oversight panels in major metropolitan areas were created. The ICE field office in Atlanta was placed under federal court oversight for 3 years. 17 other ICE agents were investigated based on complaint patterns similar to Chen and Rodriguez. 8 were disciplined, 5 were terminated, and 3 faced their own criminal referrals for civil rights violations. The supervisors who had reviewed previous complaints against Chen and Rodriguez without taking meaningful action also faced consequences. Keisha returned to her nursing duties after taking maternity leave to deliver her son. She didn't seek ongoing media attention or try to become a professional activist, but her case had an impact far beyond her personal experience. Medical centers across the country began implementing Know Your Rights training for all staff members. The American Nurses Association developed new protocols for documenting and reporting immigration enforcement activities that interfered with patient care. The story of what happened to Keisha Washington at Southeast Atlanta Medical Center is about more than 2 ICE agents making terrible decisions. It's about the reality that American citizenship alone is not sufficient protection against racial profiling and discrimination by government officials. It's about the fact that military service, federal employment, and professional credentials mean nothing if law enforcement officers have already decided you don't belong based on the color of your skin. Keisha never said she wanted to become a symbol for civil rights enforcement. She was simply trying to get to work at a job where she saved lives every day when she was targeted by agents who saw her pregnancy and race as suspicious. But her experience became a teaching moment about what accountability looks like when the system actually works. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, document everything possible with your phone if you can do so safely. Clearly state that you do not consent to searches. Ask for badge numbers, supervisor contact information, and the legal basis for any detention. Remember that exercising your constitutional rights is not suspicious behavior, and law enforcement officers who claim otherwise are revealing their own ignorance of the law. 7 years of military service protecting American democracy overseas. 6 years of nursing experience saving American lives in hospital emergency rooms. Federal employment status with security clearances, and she still wasn't safe from being profiled and arrested at her own workplace by agents who had decided she didn't belong in the country she had literally sworn an oath to defend. Chen and Rodriguez destroyed their own careers the moment they decided to approach Keisha based on assumptions rather than evidence. Every decision they made after that just made their legal situation worse. Their supervisors who ignored previous complaints share responsibility for creating the conditions that allowed this incident to happen. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you learned something or this made you think differently about accountability, leave a comment below. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories that matter. What was the most shocking part of this case for you? The agent's behavior, the system that enabled it, or the comprehensive accountability that followed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.